A very happy Sunday. We are here with our Tech Sunday today with some great guests today and great co-hosts along also. So we have Pete Nichols from, you guys probably knew him from another company previously, but now he's with Circle D and this company right here, Specialties. And of course, we have John Capizzi with us as well. You all know him. He's well known in the industry. We have I can't pronounce Mr. Buffalo up there. I'm just joking. We have Jasper Graham with us, and we have our street guy Mark with us as well too. Mark Mosher, you guys know him as well as being on our show. And we are now on the RPM TV networks as well, so you guys will see us on Amazon, Apple TV, Roku, all that. So you guys can watch all the past episodes. Special TV series that are being filmed. I know Jasper is some, and Mark, and then there's some other TV shows and a new TV series coming very shortly too. It's in the process of being produced right now. So we have a lot going on in the background, a lot of big changes for the industry, and trying to keep no prep and just racing. You guys will see a little bit different, some bracket racing and some other things as well. We have teams all across the United States. We have a West Coast, East Coast, and here in the middle. So we thank everybody for the support this year and a lot of big changes coming. And I'd love to get started. And I don't know that Pete really needs an introduction. I think everybody knows Pete pretty well. Um, definitely. And he is now, I guess maybe you could kind of talk about, people get to know you a little bit, and life has changed recently, and maybe you can kind of share, where you're gone to and tell us a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the show. Grateful to be a guest and really appreciate the opportunity. Just quick background on me. I've always been into cars since a very, very young age, young childhood. Grew up in a family of mostly heavy equipment mechanics. Stepdad owned a race car chassis fabrication shop in my small hometown. Got into muscle cars and drag cars and stuff like that at an early age. From Washington State originally, moved down to Arizona, went to trade school, worked at a speed shop in Arizona for, I want to say it was 10 or 12 years. Ran around in the local, drag racing and street race scene there. Slot opened up at Hughes when the speed shop deal was kind of going south. So it was kind of serendipitous on the timing. And I already knew the product line because I sold it to the speed shop. So I was a natural fit for the slot and the sales counter at Hughes. And my time there lasted, I forget if it was 11 or 12 years. I think it was closer to 12. Kind of went up through the ranks, became sales manager, had a brief hiatus after about 7 years, came back a year later into the purchasing manager position, then took over managing the social media, did some research and development stuff for them, new product development, help get them into the, no prep and more street race scene as far as converter stuff goes. Got to work with some really cool prep cars like John's Mustang, Slim Shady. That was a big win for me when
game changer.
When he grabbed the record, that was like the coolest thing that I ever got to be a small part of, and I'm sure he'll get it back here soon. But yeah, just a lot of cool little things like that, working with customers. Hughes and I, the short and sweet version is we just wanted different things. So I put some feelers out there into the industry. I actually negotiated with several companies and had a couple others reach out to me after they found out that I was looking, and landed at Circle D in Houston with Chris Seahorn and his crew there. It's I've been there right at a month now, and it's been nothing short of amazing. Really, really positive change.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining and sharing with everybody the changes. I think I've heard nothing but good things from where you've moved to Circle D, and we're gonna have fun. We're gonna have Jasper and John, and Mark here get a chance to ask a few questions, and we'll talk about converters and converter tech and transmissions and all that stuff. And you pick your brain a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah. Any questions you have, happy to share. I'm all about info share, so whatever you guys want to know. If I don't
I'd
know
love-
the answer, I'll tell you I don't know.
I'd love to start off with, it sounds like you have a lot different, better probably way of speccing them at Circle D. I've read in a few articles there's some sort of program you guys are using. Maybe explain that a little better.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, all that credit goes to Chris and the team there. This is stuff that they've all had in place for, quite a while and have been working on for a very long time to try and hone in and perfect, and are continually learning and adapting. But Circle D has computational fluid dynamics software to where they have actually 3D scanned different converter cores as far as the impellers and the turbines. And then 3D scan different stator designs from the OEM cast aluminum stators that come in these cores to, billet steel, flat vane stuff that we make in-house, and then our billet steel airfoil designs that we make in-house. And with that computational fluid dynamic software, we can actually simulate the fluid flow characteristics inside the torque converter at given speed ratios. And the speed ratio is the relationship of the turbine speed to the impeller speed. So basically, as the converter is coming up to stall, we can see what the fluid is doing inside the converter in this software, and it's actually incredibly accurate. So we can see what a stator should do in terms of how it changes the fluid flow dynamics inside the converter before that stator ever goes in the converter and goes in a car at the track. And it's a continual learning and development process. So, we're wanting to be the best that we can be and offer a really high performing killer product, and hopefully take some of the guesswork out of it that comes when it comes to building custom torque converters.
Now, is that allowing you to also simulate with the dumps running down the track and stuff like that, or still kind of building that?
No, so dump valve tuning hasn't been incorporated into the CFD software yet. Could it be? That's a question I'd have to ask our engineer, Ronnie. The guy's a genius. He's awesome. He and Chris, the owner, really the driving force behind that. And then Cassie, who's also in the engineering department, she's incredible. That would be a question I'd have to ask them and get back to you on that, because I don't know if that's something that could be successfully incorporated, because there's so many factors that go into that.
A ton.
You have your converter feed restriction. You have, does the car have a cooling system on it or not for the transmission? What are the orifice diameters? What's the lube oil circuit in the transmission? I mean, there's so much that would go into that. I don't want to say it can't be done. I just honestly don't know.
Yeah, especially with the no prep guys that are probably using it a little more than a lot of people, or maybe not, but the surface is always a changing too, trying to decide if they're actually hooking or not.
Yeah, it's rarely ever the same, pat round to round.
What kind of fluid do you guys use on that dyno? And what's the difference between a hydraulic and a lat fluid?
So it's not actually a dyno. It's actually all software driven. So we aren't actually putting a converter on a dyno. We 3D scan the parts and then plug those models into the software and are able to simulate fluid flow characteristics based on the 3D modeling.
So that's like the picture here on the screen?
Yeah, so that's kind of an overall picture. So on the left side of that picture...
Oops, sorry. Well, there we go.
All good. On the left side of that picture, you'd have the impeller of the converter. So that's the transmission side of the converter. That's the part that's being driven by the engine. On the right-hand side, you have the turbine. So that's the part that is actually splined to the input shaft to your transmission. So that's what's providing the drive to the transmission. And then in between, you can see the two stator vanes there. So that represents the stator. So in the other pictures I sent over with the green and the blue and all of that, so this is more like a overall picture here in this. And then in the other pictures, those are actual shots of the CFD modeling results. Yeah, so there you go. So on the left side, we have the impeller. On the right side, we have the turbine. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. In this one, on the left side, we have the turbine. On the right side, we have the impeller. And in the middle, we have the stator. And so all those arrows you can see are showing the direction of fluid travel inside the converter.
Now, what's the difference between, I'm seeing the different pictures here.
Yeah.
And a couple of that's this big difference in the
Difference in stators.
Okay.
Each one of those pictures represents 3 different of our billet steel airfoil stator designs.
Okay. So that's kind of like these right here.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
bill ones.
So
Okay.
that whole design is kind of unique to Circle D. Airfoil design stators have been in use by OEM converter manufacturers since the dawn of converters invention. So the airfoil design isn't in and of itself a brand new thing. It's something that the OEM started with decades and decades ago. But our ability to model those stator vane shapes and influence the fluid flow characteristics in the software, as represented in the picture you see on the screen, makes our profiles unique. So our billet steel airfoil stuff that we're doing, while it may borrow from OEM influence or inspiration, so to speak, in terms of just a generic airfoil shape to the vane, the actual profiles of the vanes themselves on our billet stuff is totally unique to Circle D, and something that was created in-house. So with our 5-axis CNC machining ability combined with using SolidWorks to draw these things up and then modeling them in CFD, it gives us the ability to create vane profile shapes that just haven't existed before. If you look at your OEM stuff, that's all going to be cast aluminum, and so you're limited to the mold that you're working with as far as what type of profile you get coming out of the casting process.
Makes sense totally.
Black magic.
And then, on
That's
the
what I
other
was
side of
thinking.
things, we do have billet steel flat vane stators, and flat vane stators are what most people are used to seeing, like with the Hughes stuff, with the Pro SSX converters, and other comparable designs like, the PTC and Pro Torque and Camerons and all these guys out there that build just amazing quality and highly performing products. A steel flat vane stator is kind of the traditional design for the really high horsepower drag racing stuff. And for good reason. It works really, really well. And there's a lot you can do with flat vane design to really manipulate how a converter functions, and coupling points and flash and all that good stuff. And so we do get into the billet flat vane stuff as well. But the airfoil stuff is what we're really, really excited about and are hoping, help sort of provide the next evolution in drag racing converters, so to speak, to help elevate people's programs to that next level.
Oh, Richard has a question here. What fluid do you recommend for the trans, hydraulic, or synthetic oils?
Yeah, it's a good question. And also Mark asked that too in part of his original question. So there's a lot of debate about fluids. Honestly, there's a ton of good stuff out there. Circle D doesn't necessarily endorse any one particular brand. More so, we kind of default to the transmission builder preference because the friction materials in your transmission, whether you're running thrust washers or roller bearings, that type of stuff, all that's going to have an impact on what type of fluid works best to give you the most durability and longevity out of the transmission components, whereas the converter is more of a fluid coupling, and it's a little more tolerant of a wider variety of fluids. And really the main thing that influences fluid choice from the converter side is, my opinion, is more relative to the fluid viscosity. I personally...
Thermal stability too.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So, like the stuff that I sent you, John, with the AMSOIL compressor oil, it's pretty cool stuff because it's very thermally stable, has excellent shear resistance, and you can get it in 3 different single weights as well as a multi-viscosity. So it gives you some tuning ability to the converter in terms of coupling through fluid viscosity, which is pretty handy. Guys have used John Deere High Guard forever, or generic versions of High Guard from Tractor Supply or whatever. And the original, like OG High Guard formula works really well, especially if you're trying to tighten a converter up with fluid. The generic stuff, it's really, people argue with me on it, but it's trash. It has no place in a high performance drag racing transmission or converter. Then as far as the ATFs go, I mean, LAT, in my opinion, is hands down the best real ATF out there. They do have a
Wicked
couple
good
different
fluid.
formulas. Yeah, it's incredible.
I've had such amazing luck with it. Like
Yeah.
originally, we were running compressor oil from AMSoil and stuff. It worked great. I no discredit at all. And like you said, you could switch weights and tighten it or loosen it. It'll click.
Right.
You know, it wasn't some huge swing, but it was noticeable at least. So that's always a bonus. And then we switched to lat, and like John just took that transmission apart that you built for me, Pete, and we had
Right.
300 plus passes on it. Now we're also a car that goes off the brake for the burnout and then backs up and then goes off the brake again. And I'm sure you've seen some of the no preps we go to. I've
Sure.
been hung out there for 10 seconds, 11 seconds. If, you know, depending who we're racing, like, you know, a couple of the guys need 15 seconds. I don't know how they don't burn down their stuff, but that lat fluid, we never even changed it for 200.
Find
of
some
those
nitrous.
It's
Yeah, there
just
you go.
really, really durable.
Yeah, so for a real ATF, yeah, LAT, in my opinion, there's no question. But there are other really good products out there, like AMSoil Super Shift is one that comes to mind.
Yeah, we use that too.
Lucas products have been good, the Sure Shift, or they have a marine ATF that is actually based on the Type F formula that works well. They have a new racing Type F that works well. A lot of good stuff. So I generally say listen to your tranny builder first and foremost, as far as what they're comfortable with in their product and what's going to help them, you know, stand behind it should an issue come up. And then, past that, you know, rely on viscosity that you can get in the product you like for converter tuning side of it.
Now, out of curiosity, what is everybody here using? And I've heard from John and from Jasper. What about you, Mark? What kind of fluid are you using?
My tranny guy, the guy I was dealing with from Trans Specialties for my last glide, he told me, because they put a 3-year warranty on the low gear planetaries and a few other things, and the fluid that they wanted me to use was Valvoline high mileage.
Yeah.
It's a brand
Okay.
new.
Yep.
It was a brand new deal. That's what they wanted me to use. But for some of these guys that's never bought a new converter before, how you could custom tune them for their car. What's some of the criteria that you need to be able to do that? Do you just need motor weight or what do you got?
So I want to answer that, but if I could, just real quick,
Yeah.
I want to back up to what we were talking about in the CFD software, because our engineer Ronnie is watching the show and he just texted me with some kind of cool information. Kind of going back to what Jasper was asking about, you know, dump valve tuning and pressures and all that relative to what the CFD software is capable of accommodating.
Yes.
And he just texted me that in that software, we can influence the converter characteristics with the fluid in the software, because the fluid does make provision for density and viscosity in the software. And then we also can view the different converter characteristics by altering the charge pressure setting in the software. So we can actually simulate different oils and different charge pressures in the CFD modeling software to see how that affects converter tuning. Doesn't quite go as far as the dump valve stuff like you were asking, but kind of in the same ballpark of what you were asking. Yeah, it's incredibly capable stuff. But then to go back to Mark's, as far as basically what does it take to spec a converter, I actually have like 22 preset questions that I like to ask people.
Like a list like this long.
Yeah. And the just, and people, you know, I'll send it to them on Messenger or through email or whatever. And the gist of that is I want to know as much detail about your engine combination as possible. I want to know what fuel you're running. I want to know what engine management you're running. I want to know your shift points, the type of transmission, the ratios, the rear gear ratio, the vehicle weight, the tire, elevation, the type of surfaces you're racing on, whether it's 1/8 or 1/4. Is it going to see street use? Is it going to be a drag and drive car for like Rocky Mountain Race Week or Drag Week? You know, mid plate thickness, flex plate style. Does it have dump valves? Does it have a trans brake? so on and so forth. So it's fairly comprehensive. It's not difficult to answer because it's just short form questions. But yeah, the more detailed, it's kind of like computers and the old cliche of garbage in, garbage out. The same holds true with custom torque converters. If we don't get accurate information and detail going in, then we aren't going to be able to do our job speccing the converter and building the converter to do what you're expecting it to do once it's in the car. On the flip side, can we make a mistake? Sure, any converter builder can. But generally, the more detail I have, the better I'm able to do my job and get you a converter
Closer you
spec
start.
that's, yeah, you know, that you're going to be happy with it out of the box, or at least really close.
Limpy said was high up, by the way.
Hi, Limpy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that information. I think that with that software you guys have, I think it'll make a big impact on people and helping them with their tuning and getting everything working the way they need to. Do you guys give a lot of support to your customers, like, you know, using the software and getting them kind of going that are newer to working with Circle D?
Yeah, so customer service is a really big deal at Circle D. It always has been. That's nothing that is new or unique to the company. Chris, the owner, he's very customer service driven, and sets that expectation for all of the team there. So support on the front side and the back side, we definitely offer our full converter tuning support to a customer, whether it's a new customer or current customer. You know, full data review, whether you're running Holly or Haltech or Fuel Tech or, you know, whatever you like. You know, we can review your data with you. We model pretty much every custom drag racing converter gets modeled in CFD before we build it, rather than just, you know, coming up with, oh, well, we know this works in this combo, so we're going to give them the same thing. Sometimes that ends up with the same converter in the similar combos, but nonetheless, we like to model everything and have an idea of exactly what it should do based on the information we've received and what we design. And then as far as support after the sale goes, apart from the data review, you know, for the people that are buying a welded converter, you know, within the first 6 months of purchase, if we don't nail it for you out of the box, you know, we'll give you a free stall adjustment, work with you however we need to. On our bolt together stuff, we can do a stator exchange, so you're not having to send the converter back and forth. Obviously, a bolt together is serviceable by the racer themselves or their training builder, or whoever they're comfortable having open it up. And we can just send you a stator and swap those out. You can send the old stator back, and we'll send you a fresh O-ring and help you get the converter tuned that way without you guys, you know, having to just buy another stator right off the bat. If you make a big change, like you started out with a 5.3 with, you know, an S400 chassis turbo, and then you go to a 388 with Jose 107, then, you know, that's a different story. You're going to need to buy.
We like to party.
Yeah, I'm all about partying, but, you know, a big combo change, you're going to be buying another stator because that's not really oh, we missed the mark type of thing. That's you changed your combo. But if the converter doesn't do what it needs to do after we've had a chance to review data, then, you know, we'll exchange stators with the customer to help keep costs down to them.
That's huge. And I think it's huge, the customer service and the support you're able to give your customers and be able to run that software and actually find exactly what they need. And especially if they make changes, you know, like I said, going from the small block to a big block, you know, turbos to nitrous and all that, all has an effect, you know, on their setups as well.
Right.
So it's appreciated for good customer service. All I got to say. I just want to shout that out one more time. John, do you have any more questions for him at all, too?
Yeah, just wanted to comment on the dump valve thing. Dumps kind of take a different ripple or make a different ripple in the converter operating, like figuring out what makes what change, because the primary reason you run a dump is to aerate the converter.
Right.
You're taking some of the fluid volume out, and so the software would have a tough time figuring out how much is air and where the air is.
Yeah.
Versus fluid density.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting thing. I know with the 9.5 inch, like the Nissan core converters, both of my cars don't operate much different between about 60 pounds of converter charge pressure and about 160 pounds.
Gotcha.
If you go over that, they start getting a lot tighter.
Right.
And if you go under that, they don't greatly loosen up until you're under about 30 pounds in mine.
Right.
And then under 30, you know, I guess on the same power tune up, same chassis weight, same everything else, mine will flash, I don't know, 700 RPM looser, and you'll lose a tenth or so, but it'll drive through a muddy puddle pretty much.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
kind of interesting things.
Yeah, and it's funny because literally every combo reacts a little bit differently when it comes to dump valves and how it cavitates the converter, because, you know, a converter is a load sensitive device. So anything we do to affect load to the converter on the front of the converter, meaning the engine side, or the back of the converter, meaning transmission ratio, rear gear ratio, rear tire height, vehicle weight, it's all going to influence how that converter reacts. And as a consequence, is also going to influence what the dump valves do and how the coupling characteristics are affected by the range of charge pressure. So, you know, what Slim does with the current 9.5 and the 2-speed 400 in your dumps, take that same car and put a 388 or a 427 in it. There it is, my favorite.
Playing out in the garage.
That same car with a 388 or a 427 and say a 258 converter that's going to hold 2,000 plus horsepower and a whole lot more torque, you know, is going to react totally differently in terms of how the converter regains converter charge after the dump valve shuts off, and where that converter is efficient in terms of coupling relative to the charge pressure. So yeah, it's a lot.
So for like the last 2 years since I got that transmission and converter and dump valves off you, I get about probably one call a week from a racer asking me to explain dumps and explain what the pros and cons are, and then how to set theirs up and stuff. And like you said, it's super tough to do because, you know, I got one guy calling me with a big block with twins,
right?
And I've got another guy calling me with a Mini Cooper with a 1.6. So it's real hard to try to touch it over the phone. Like this is an end all be all for it. But if you could kind of give just an explanation, maybe a couple of them will hear it and not have to call me next week.
Sure.
I think it's something good that people understand what dump valves who don't know what it is too, you know, so.
Right. And, you know, dump valves are kind of a funny subject in the drag racing world because you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. And, you know, everybody's got an opinion about them. There are some people out there that, you know, are adamant that they do absolutely nothing. And then there are other people that swear by them, and you have people that walk somewhere in the middle or just don't know. In my opinion, and based on my experience, dump valves are a very effective tool to have in your toolbox for additional tunability on a combo, particularly on cars that race on challenging surfaces like the stuff that Jasper does. You know, whether it's on the street or it's on no prep on the back of a track or an airport strip, you know, being able to manipulate that converter oil instead of having to chop power out of the tune, and just sort of use the converter to help manage how aggressively you're accelerating the drive shaft and consequently, you know, how much wheel speed you're potentially getting into on these challenging surfaces, I think actually makes the car arguably a little more consistent, and definitely, I think, you know, easier to drive by being able to leave some power in the tune-up. You're going to get less RPM drop in the gear change, so you have less chance of upsetting the chassis or upsetting the tire on those challenging surfaces. And that's where I think the dump valves can really shine to manipulate that converter oil instead of manipulating as much of the power curve with the tune-up. An instance like in John's car where, you know, you have a smaller displacement engine and you have a really big turbo and you have aggressive cam timing. So you don't have a ton of cylinder pressure available at low engine speed. Using that dump valve to cavitate the converter and help reduce that resistance to the engine coming up on RPM against the trans brake it just helps the engine respond faster, improves your staging time and your boost response while you're staging. But generally on the type of stuff that, John is racing on as far as surface goes, it's going to be a killer surface for the most part. And, dump valve tuning strategy doesn't necessarily come into play as much in one of those cars down track as it would in something like Jasper's car. But that's all we're really doing is we're manipulating converter oil by reducing the level of oil volume inside a torque converter. We're forcing that converter to cavitate. We're creating aeration, like John said earlier, inside the converter. And so that's increasing the percentage of converter slip that's present in the converter, which, is another way of saying more stall speed, basically. So we can take a tight converter and loosen it up with the dumps where it needs to be loose, whether it's John's scenario for staging purposes or it's Jasper's scenario for drive shaft management on a bad surface. And then when we close those dump valves, we can get the converter to recharge with oil and get it to couple more efficiently, and you still get the mile per hour. You still get that good converter coupling. So it's kind of a best of both worlds. Is it a must-have for every combo? Does every combo benefit from them? No. Like with anything, it's application specific. And it also comes down to a lot of, personal preference. Does the guy, want them? Just to have that extra tool in his toolbox. It's not something I could tell you have to have. There's a ton of successful race cars, whether it's prep or no prep or street race, that don't run them. But, I'm the type of person, I like having every tool I can, whether I need it or not, because the one time I need it and I don't have it, I'm going to wish I had it. So I'm a big fan of them personally. And I noticed Sean Fensler asked in the comments, does Circle D offer dump valves? Mm-hmm. Currently we don't. That is a product that we want to be able to offer, but we don't want to just come out with the same thing that other companies offer. If we can't do it better, we don't want to do it. So we're talking about designs in-house. We're looking at different valve options. We're looking at different flow rates. And assuming we can come out with a better product, then that's probably going to be a latter half 2022 product that you'll see become available. But again, we want to offer the best that we possibly can in terms of performance and quality and appearance and all those things that matter to the racer.
For right now, are you recommending M&Ms for customers, or
there's so many good products, honestly. I mean, the Hughes kits are still a great kit. They're complete with the instructions and gaskets and all that stuff. So that's a great kit to use. M&M, their valves are fantastic. They have the highest flowing stuff that I'm aware of. Somebody correct me on that if I'm wrong, but they're 16 gallon per minute. Dave over at Performance Racing Transmissions, he does a really killer dump valve setup, also 16 gallon per minute valves. Cameron's Converter Services has his own variety of dump valve arrangements, also a killer product. So there's some really, really good options out there right now in the market for those.
Nice.
Jasper, how did you control your dump valves? Did you pulse them, or what do you do to control them?
So this is one of those deals where like Holly kind of does some things that Fuel Tech doesn't, and that's what makes Holly kind of cool. And I don't argue with people when they choose one or the other. I prefer Fuel Tech. John runs Holly, but the way we had to control ours is we run them through the progressive nitrous kit in reverse. So like when I'm on the trans brake, it's putting 100% nitrous, which is the solenoids of the dump valves running wide open. And then when I let off, it's all been a change. So the original combo that Pete spec'd for me was like a 1400 horse, could make 15. The one time we shot the rods out the pan, but like we had a 1400 horse combo with a lot heavier car. And so in that scenario, we ran the dump valves a lot. I ran them all the way through the shift. If I didn't run them through the shift, it would knock the tire on a crappy surface, like almost every time. So we would run them almost like, let's say the surface we're on is 570s or something. we would run them till probably about 5 seconds, and then we'd shut them off, and it would give us our mile an hour. It would start pulling on the big end, and you could actually feel it, and it would allow me to make the shift only be like 800, 900 RPMs. The catch to that is, and I would love to just let people know so they're ready, like Pete said, if you're not sure, you're bummed when you don't know or you don't have it, but they'll get the tranny hotter. Like the trans will get hotter in a run where I run the dump valves all the way through compared to a run where I don't. Well, then we switched motor combos after the first year, and now we've got a motor that, you know, we can make 18 2019 with, and we might make 16, you know, at a place like War in the Woods, maybe even 1650. But what happened is we ended up crashing the white car, and once that crashed, we switched to a coupe. Well, the coupe was probably 300 pounds lighter than the white car, and it just reacted completely different. Something else that we did that I almost don't want to say because it like really worked out, but we're still not doing it with the new car, is the orange car had a 456 gear in it. We were running a 390 and we ended up with a 456. And in my experience, which I'm not saying either gear was faster or slower, I never got to really test it multiple spots to find out, you know, like, okay, no, it's not. If I add more power with the 390, it does better than less. But what I did notice is like the way the car climbed. So like with a 390, when I shift, it drops 1,000 RPMs and it might only pick that 1,000 back up before the stripe. So like if I shift it $8,000, it drops to 7, and I might come through at like 72 in the white car. In the orange car, it climbs just like first gear with the 456. So it was like, I felt like it wasn't hitting the tire or upsetting the tire as much on the shift. So like I liked it. But then if you go somewhere like War in the Woods where you can run a 470, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say times or whatever, but I don't really care. If you're running that fast there, that 456 ought to have been coming through the traps at like $9,000. So it wasn't a gear you could use everywhere. And it was really odd. You left on like 4 pounds instead of 7 or 8 and really low RPM, but it still pulled. Where like with the white car in the end, we found out what it liked was as high a RPM as we could get, and whatever boost made that hook and go. And the car just liked leaving at higher RPM. Where with the orange car, if you left it above 4,200 anywhere, it blew the tire clean off because there was just too much gear. So like we used it in so many different ways. Like when we had the 456s at the race John was at with us at the come up, like that surface was so bad. Like terrible. I don't care what anyone tells you, like first couple rounds, if you were running 620s, you were killing it. Like
yeah, you're going around.
And don't get me wrong, there was a few people that probably ran a 590 or something, and props to them. But if you were running 620s there, you were killing it. Well, we found out real quick that we needed to we never ran the dump with the new combo, you know, because the motor made so much more torque and power that the converter was right without the dump valves. Where with the other setup, it's almost like if you weren't running the dump valves, it didn't work right. So once it became like the right converter without the dump valves, when we went to the come up, we used them all the way down the track because it was just softening the car up. It was making it so that we could hold that tire all the way down because we were racing in 20-degree weather on the worst surface ever. So like,
yeah, I noticed with
it's kind of like Pete said, the dump valves are all over the place for your combo and for what you're doing. And like, if you're not a person, if you're one of those people that don't like too much data, it's also something to think about because like it's adding a whole other dimension to what you're doing.
Right.
No, what's the difference, John, with using the Holly software? Is it a lot easier to control the dump valves?
I like the Holly just because I can make an output that's designed around one piece of data. Like it could be throttle position, or it could be throttle position, RPM, wheel speed, boost, G meter. You can tie a bunch of different pieces into one single output. If this and this and this and this are all true, but this other thing isn't, I can make an output I can make it flash the taillights at 3 Gs at 1 second after trans brake release and 100-mile-an-hour wheel speed. It's just you kind of get to be I'm trying to think of the guy that paints the cute little butterfly on the painting, the meme guy. I'm trying to remember what his name, Bob Ross or whatever. You get to be that guy with the software. You choose any piece of data, you can make it do it.
Yeah, they're really cool. Like you can do anything with them. It's just an advanced table, and as long, mind you, you got to be intelligent to do that.
Well, that's how I put things. Is that the Holley, for people who are very detail oriented and want to learn the controls and tables and learn everything, the Holley's is great for that. If you want something simple and maybe you're not like a real tech type person, you just want something easy to use, and nice. That's why I suggest the Fuel Tech. It just makes sense for the person. What works best for you. If you don't, and I think those are key things to what you use. And same thing, using their software to figure out what the right converter is, I think makes it a big difference too. In the same way, they have a company that has that knowledge and can share that with you and get you set up right, versus going through a lot of trial and error too.
Yeah, for sure. Like Pete said earlier, where like put the fluid in that your builder says, put the EFI system that the guy tuning it knows. That's huge too. I would say if you're going to try to learn it all yourself, I would definitely pick a Fuel Tech. It is remarkably easier to start figuring it out and how to navigate it. I mean, tuning's tuning. You either need to know, well, I guess there's a huge difference too. You guys use what is it? Volume efficiency or whatever. And I think we use like injector pulses.
Okay. For like main fuel table.
Yep.
I'm going to say VE. VE is a common one. I actually use pounds per hour.
And that's what we use on Fuel Tech.
Okay. Yeah.
And you can switch it to a volumetric too, but it comes standard that way. It just seemed a lot easier to me than the other way.
I really like pounds per hour. And I came from that with E85 stuff because, ballpark 1 pound per hour of fuel at 30 pounds of boost is roughly a horsepower. Yeah. So you could just ballpark the fuel table. You say, okay, this thing at 30 pounds of boost is going to make 1,300 horse. Well, that row in the fuel table had to be 1,300. So you could whack out a fuel table in about 3 minutes and go make pulls, and closed loop will cover the rest. You're pretty close.
And we're kind of getting off subject a little bit, but mostly about transmissions here today and stuff. And we have Mark up top. It keeps life simple, and just use carburetor, and it's just that way. And he's sitting back and smiling back there.
If I may,
it's not simple, Mark.
That's actually
it's the most complicated system in the world. Running a Fuel Tech with a carburetor and smart coils, like no one does that. So
it would be nice.
I think at one time I was the only guy with Fuel Tech and a distributor. I think that was the thing.
Running through an MSD box.
What were you saying, Pete?
For the guys like Mark who are running a carburetor, in the realm of dump valve control, there are other alternatives. So for anybody watching that's like, well, I run a carburetor and I want dump valves, how do I make them work? You can run them on off, just wiring it in series with the trans brake circuit. But if you want to take advantage of pulse width modulation capability, Leash Electronics actually makes a standalone dump valve controller that works killer.
Is that what was in Billy's truck?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. So he runs one.
Yep, I saw one time in the track in the pits. He had like a little box that he was like using to control. I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, it works really good. It gives it'll run up to 2 stages of dump, and it will give you 3 ramps per stage per run. So whether you have a 2-speed or a 3-speed, if you were wanting to bring the dump on, to help manage a gear change, or exactly where a bad spot is on the surface you're racing and you want to take away some converter drive at that point, which Billy has done. That controller works killer for that. Or for the guy that has like a basic, like a Terminator X, or, a Haltech 950, or, something that doesn't quite have so many ins and outs, and they don't want to have to go and upgrade their whole fuel injection system, then that leash controller is also a nice viable alternative for the more entry-level EFI guys who want to be able to have pulse width modulation and not use all their I/O on their current ECU.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's huge for some people who don't know that.
You could use a progressive nitrous kit too, and just do what we do on the Field Tech and run it in reverse.
And that's really what it is. I mean, it's a backwards nitrous progressive. So,
on is off, off is on.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've also seen some that use like MSD window switches. If you just had to get it up to the converter.
Yep.
There's
a lot of creative ways you can do
that. I run a fairly big cubic inch nitrous motor, not real big, but nitrous
400
car.
cube?
It's 620 cubic inch. Dual dominator, nitrous steel, and I do a lot of racing with Jasper. We do all the street racing's where I'm from. That's what I do mostly, but we do a lot of back of the track stuff. And I notice when I'm at a track I can't get after it at and really use the converter I had built for my car. At the gear change, it tries to knock the tire off. And if I pull nitrous out of it at the gear change, it's even worse.
Right.
So,
the worst thing you want to do is pull power, because if you're reducing torque, anytime you reduce torque, you tighten the converter. That's an ideal scenario where a dump valve can help.
I think a dump valve would help you tons.
Because that thing's always flying to the gear change. And if it's a fairly junk surface at the gear change, it'll smoke the tires. You got to catch it.
Or you get into the tune-up side and you're pulling timing to try and control it, but then again,
it makes the converter tighter.
You're pulling torque away from the engine. So you're from on the surface it makes sense, but in reality it actually magnifies the problem. So
unless you pull enough to make it a turd, then obviously it don't spin.
Either that. Or you just short shift it really early and, you just ride the converter the whole run. But then, that brings its own problems, makes a lot of heat. It's really hard on the converter. Your mile per hour suffers. It's hard on everything. And your mile per hour suffers. So, with the technology we have available today, I can't see somebody wanting to run their program like that.
Yeah. I guess that's why I still got carburetors.
Hard to fault it if it works.
I mean,
everywhere
it works.
I'm a big carburetor guy. I mean, a well-tuned carburetor, they make plenty of power. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Devin Simpson asked a good question about thrust bearings and dump valves. Running a 360 thrust without a dump valve, do you need a Torrington? When it comes to dumps, that's another good topic. Protecting the engine thrust bearing and engine platforms that have a weaker thrust bearing, like your LS engines, your Ford Modular and Coyote platforms. I know in Devin's case, he's running an Australian Ford Barra engine, which has a thrust that's 180-degree thrust instead of 360. It's similar to a mod motor. Those engines can benefit from a dump valve just to help manage that converter charge pressure and keep the converter from pushing so hard against the crankshaft where that thrust bearing is trying to absorb forces that, it was never designed to handle. By knocking that charge pressure down, we're keeping that thrust bearing from wearing prematurely or, outright failing in some circumstances. And again, in my experience, some motors never need it, and other motors, you can't keep a thrust bearing in them in the same engine family. There's some that are just more finickier than others. In the Torrington thrust, that's an interesting option too, that, you'll see more in the really, really high horsepower, high end stuff, your the World combos, your Pro 275 stuff.
I think we,
other than initial machining, there's not much downside.
Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah. He's going to have to log back in and come back.
While we're waiting, John Ryan had a good question for Capizzi there.
Which one was that? This one?
Yeah.
Or is it above it?
Oh, Gonna say right now the only time I use dump stuff at all is to get the get the car to the chip.
Right.
So if I don't use the dump at all, if I leave everything off, it takes roughly 3/4 of a second longer to get to the chip. Beyond that, by the time, like last year's combo had a Garrett 98 on it. It's got a Jose GTR 102 on it now. It virtually, like, it should spool pretty similar, other than we're going to put a little more camshaft in it. So it shouldn't make things too hard. It was about 3.6 seconds to make 15 pounds from 1,000 RPM idle. So pretty quick to be ready to rip. A couple fireballs and she's done. But I just run a single stage external dump valve. Drops charge pressure from right now, I think about 115 pounds on the brake to upper 30s, I think. And that's pretty much all I do with it. If the surface is a real challenge, I will actually leave it on the whole way down. Turn the converter into a little bit more of a mud puddle, kind of calms down the G meter, and off she goes. And my street car, we used to do that quite a bit. The trackside no prep stuff, when I was running like the Anarchy series at Great Lakes Dragaway, that was on a 275 radial trackside on a scraped track. And at that point, that was like 3 years ago, that car would go 5.0, 144, with the dump on the whole way, 30 pounds of charge pressure the whole way down. But it was on fire when you got back with it. Made a lot of heat, but real happy.
Awesome. And also, Devin did say that he did upgrade to the 360 thrust, by the way, to be safe. Back to that. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Appreciate that, John. Definitely.
So, Pete, if I had to send a converter in to get a RPM change or an adjustment or changing a whole combo, what's the wait time on something like that?
So right now our lead times at Circle D on stall changes, freshen ups, repairs, that type of thing, we try to keep in the 5 to 10 business day window.
Oh, yeah.
Our lead times on new builds right now are a little further out than we'd like. We're running like 4 to 6 week lead times on new builds, and a lot of them are going out closer to that 6 week period. The reason for that is Circle D actually moved facilities a couple months ago. Chris had a whole new spec facility built. It's 58,000 square feet, tons of room for growth, which we do plan on continuing to grow. And during that moving process, it took a couple of weeks to get all the machines moved, to get everything online, to get production and manufacturing back up and running. So that really kind of put us behind the 8 ball in lead times. So for anybody that's watching and wondering how long is it going to take or where's my converter, that's why. Generally, we try, traditionally, we've always tried to keep lead times around 2 weeks, 3 week mark, and we're working really hard to try and get caught up and get back to those type of lead times.
You guys build that whole converter in-house in the country, or do you buy parts somewhere?
That's a great question. So, and this is going to be true of any converter builder. That is, if you're purchasing a steel converter or a half and half steel and aluminum bolt together, regardless of who's making it, you're starting with an OEM converter core that originally came out of some sort of OEM application, whether it be, the Nissan 9.5 inch stuff is been a buzzword for, decades in our industry. I mean, that's a converter core that goes all the way back to like 1983, I think. Your Toyota stuff, your GM 245 millimeter stuff that was used in front wheel drive and rear wheel drive stuff. So everybody's starting with a core. The only exception to that is if you're buying an all billet converter, whether it be like a Chance and a NXS deal or like an M&M billet aluminum converter. A lot of that stuff is kind of clean sheet design, and you're obviously getting all brand new components as far as the impeller half and all that goes. So we start with an OEM impeller and an OEM turbine, like pretty much everybody else, but then everything else is made in-house. So our stators, they're all made on our 5-axis CNC machine. centers, whether we do billet steel or billet aluminum. Our billet steel drive covers, that's all made right there in house here in Houston. Our, on our late model lockup stuff, all the pistons, that's all made right here. We do buy friction linings for our lockup converters from Alto. And that's pretty much true of everybody in the industry. You're using Alto or Raybestos for your lockup linings. But yeah, we try to keep as much in-house as we can, so that we have control over the quality of the product and control over our own destiny, so to speak. And we do use OEM aluminum stators in a lot of builds as well. And that's also true of the whole converter industry. So it's all kind of relative to, what is going to be the correct combination of parts for the specific combo.
I see. I run a 9.5-inch converter in my setup. I don't know what it's out of originally, but it's something like that.
Yeah, it's funny with 9.5-inch stuff because, technically a GM 245 millimeter core, which is probably the most common converter core out there that performance builders use, that's a 9.5. Some guys call it a 9, some guys call it a 10. The Nissan 9.5, that's real popular in turbo stuff. That's actually closer to 10 inches in diameter. We call it a 252 millimeter at Circle D. Some guys call it a 9.5. The Toyota core that's really popular. Some guys call it a 9, some guys call it a 9.5, some guys call it a 10, some guys call it a Super 8 because it uses the same stator as an Opal 8-inch core. So when you're talking converter diameters, it can be tricky to know exactly what you have unless you actually have a converter part number or pictures of it, just as a side reference.
Fair
Definitely.
enough.
Somebody had a question down here too. Would you compare billet steel versus billet aluminum stators?
So I don't have pictures readily available to show you an actual representation of CDS billet aluminum versus billet steel, but that's something I can get this week and post on Facebook just so you guys can kind of see, the differences in designs. But as far as just general comparison between materials, the billet steel is obviously a lot stronger in terms of a high heat application like a turbocharged drag car where you're going to be generating more converter heat, or car with a bunch of nitrous kits on it, or a pro charger car or whatever. The billet aluminum stuff is actually incredibly strong as well. There are companies out there that do almost exclusively billet aluminum for their drag race stuff. I know Chance does a lot of billet aluminum stators. M&M is getting into some billet aluminum stator stuff. Pro Torque has done some billet aluminum stator stuff. And so as long as you're using the right grade of aluminum, they're incredibly durable. But if you aren't using the right grade of aluminum, you can get into a stator actually collapsing in a high heat environment to where the stator will physically deform. And typically it will try to push the stator vanes towards the impeller side of the converter. And once that happens, you usually get into some interference between the impeller and the stator. And, you make some metal debris. And it becomes pretty quickly evident that you have an issue somewhere in the converter transmission.
GM 245.
Yeah. And then the cast aluminum stuff, like what you're talking about there, for sure, definitely has its limitations.
1,000 horse with a GM 245 is bad news.
Yeah, you can push them far enough, you can blow a stator up. It's pretty spectacular. And yeah,
transmission pan has a 1/4 inch of metal in it. You're like, oh, cool.
Right.
So performance side, would it be just weight, rotating mass?
Generally speaking, yes.
On like a radial type car, obviously in a no prep situation, it'd be pointless because you could just add more power or take more away because you're never using all of it. But like in an all-out drag scenario, would the billet aluminum possibly give you a little lower ET?
Yeah, I mean, so
if it's holding up.
Yeah, like an all billet converter where it's billet aluminum impeller, billet aluminum stator, billet aluminum drive cover. You can get those down into like 22, 24 pound range, even like on a big Nissan 11-inch core. for like your 4,000 or 5,000 horsepower type radial car stuff. And so, yeah, there's definitely an appreciable difference in rotating mass and general overall weight in a converter like that, for sure. And that's where you see those primarily used, is in that program where, you know, to pick up 100th is potentially massive. And that's where you see those type of converters used typically.
Something else to maybe touch on a little bit. I get asked this a lot. When would you feel that there's a reason to go power glide, turbo 400, 2-speed, 3-speed, so on and so forth?
I mean, I've always been a big power glide fan. I've gone on Facebook rants about that before. You know, the 400, a lot of it honestly comes down to
eighth or quarter.
Yeah, eighth or quarter, and honestly, personal preference. I mean, that plays a big role in it. But, you know, in terms from like a hard data standpoint, it really comes down, in my opinion, to tuning your starting line ratio and which transmission platform is going to give you the low gear that you need in concert with your rear gear ratio to get your starting line ratio where you want it. In terms of strength, you know, there's power glides out there that have been 380s. 400s have been 340s. If I'm not mistaken.
340s at RVW this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. You know, for most of your no prep stuff, your street stuff, it's pretty hard to go wrong with a power glide just because they're light, they're simple, they're low maintenance. You can get parts for them anywhere. So if you break over the weekend, chances are
they interchange.
Yeah, you know, your buddy probably has parts in his garage to fix one, type of thing. So from that standpoint, the power glide's really advantageous. When you get into the radial prep stuff, like, you know, what Slim's running in, you know, the 400 offers a lot more flexibility, if for no other reason than the wide variety of ratios. Like, you can go as numerically low in a 2-speed 400 as a 126 low gear, whereas a power glide, you're currently limited to a 158. And then the 400, just the overall chassis of the 400, so to speak, is definitely considerably stronger than a power glide at those type of levels. And then when it comes to like 2-speed versus 3-speed 400 stuff, generally I like close ratio 3-speed in a lot of the really high horsepower stuff. Especially if it's like a Pro Charger car or even a nitrous car, where you know, you got to get that blower speed up and keep it up, and you don't want to pull the engine too far out as power band on gear changes, or you have a nitrous.
Kill the ET.
Yeah, exactly. If you reduce blower speed in a centrifugal car, then you kill ET, period. So close ratio 3-speed is usually always going to be faster, between like the 60 to 330 in one of those cars than a 2-speed would. And then the same kind of holds true for nitrous stuff. You know, I think with a nitrous combo, you typically have like around 7 degrees of like effective crankshaft angle that you're getting like peak cylinder pressure. You know, whereas with a turbo car, you have like 12 degrees. So you have, you know, a power event that lasts longer. You can load them more, and they aren't as sensitive as far as that 2-speed versus 3-speed debate necessarily. But yeah, the blower nitrous stuff, close ratio 3-speed, is pretty hard to beat, in my opinion.
Definitely. And somebody had a question earlier too, is for picking up what's Wilmerstall to pick up on the starting line. I guess it's kind of not enough information there, but
I'm guessing that ties into the dump valve conversation, probably.
Yeah, probably back a little bit.
In my experience, it varies depending on the combination. You could put a single stage external dump valve on a power glide just off the lower cooler line, and it literally will do nothing in a low horsepower car because that hydraulic circuit is so slow to respond. You put it on
change.
You put it on the charge side of that same combination, and it might pick up 300 or 400 RPM in a low horsepower car. It might pick up 600 to 800 RPM in some higher horsepower. You get into the 400s, in my experience, the dump systems are a lot more responsive in the 400 because of how the charge circuitry is designed in that transmission and how the oil returns through the gear train, and just the series of restrictions that's present in that transmission In one car, it was a radial prep car with a single stage external dump valve on a 400, so just dumping off the cooler line, and with appropriate pump stator modifications to help facilitate cavitation. I actually saw 1200 RPM, which blew my mind. But that's also with a 540-inch motor with twin 94s on it. So we're talking about something that makes a lot of power everywhere. So, again, the more torque you put to it, the bigger the difference you're going to see out of that dump valve responsiveness.
I changed not that long ago from a 400 to a Glide. When I had my 400, I couldn't control the car. It was a 248 first gear. It was so violent that I broke the wheelie bars off it when it was on big tires, street racing, all kinds of crazy stuff. So when I put the 180 Glide in it, it really calmed it down and really made the car a lot faster.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's very few combos out there, whether it's street or no prep or prep these days, that can ever benefit from a 248 low gear at this point in the game.
Yeah.
Just because
even a 210 is pretty steep.
Yeah. I mean, making power these days, it's so easy. Like with power adders, the bulk power just comes immediately, and the parts have gotten so good that,
And you're throwing cubic dollars at it for the proper gear set to get that starting line ratio in the right realm.
Exactly.
A 205 gear set or a 186 or a 160.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a 160, but I stayed with a 2-speed yet.
Right.
So I got a 148 2-speed.
Pretty hard to go wrong with a 148 with a stock gear set. It's amazing the amount of power they'll handle.
It's tough and it's cheap. It's a $20 gear train.
Exactly.
What rear gear are you using?
My car, I have a 389 in it.
Okay.
So we got gear to go 195 miles an hour ish. And it's been 102 60 foot, leaving on 4,400 RPM and 15 pounds of boost.
Oh, yeah. I got a 390 rear gear, and that nitrous setup seems to work well on a 28.
Yep.
Really good starting line ratio area.
Yeah, it leaves like a rocket. Jasper's seen it.
Are you all in a second, John?
7/10, it makes 48 pounds.
That's awesome.
But wait, there's more. It'll go quicker. It's still got a boost ramp in it. So
Oh.
So this year we should have about 200 pounds out of it, and I have more turbo and eventually more engine. So should have a whole lot of problems to solve.
Me too. If I can't get pistons, I'm putting my 1471 540 in my car for this year. So I'm just kind of waiting.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
I'm exactly the same. I'm waiting on pistons. So last year's engine is going back in for right now to begin with.
Yeah.
So you're planning on shattering the record?
I think we can go threes with it. 399, 180 is on the table. That's the goal.
I would like to see that. That'd be awesome.
If the sleeves are up for it, I'm up for it. Let's do it.
Nice.
You're
I think it's gonna be a
bring
good
it out
this
to
year.
your place and then go do a peso event or something.
I know it. That's what I'm saying.
Dang, it sounds fun to go fast.
It is a riot. It is a riot. Let go of the button and just.
I don't know if like my parts are gonna look as good after 300 passes, but
You're having fun doing it. That's the key.
Yep. Smiles per gallon. That's why we do this.
For sure. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining in today in the show, and I want to thank you, Pete. Definitely, we'd love to come out and maybe see your new facility if you guys are open to that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Maybe do
Yeah,
like
it
a
looks
tour or something like that.
beautiful.
Yeah, anybody that
that's
wants to
awesome.
come by, happy to give tours. That's no problem at all. Kind of show you what we do on a day-to-day basis. We definitely love interacting with customers, media, whatever.
And that's Texas, right?
Yeah, Houston, Texas. Yep.
Yeah, we'll be down for Texas 2K filming down there, so maybe I can arrange something to come down by you guys then
Nice.
during that time period. Make a trip down there first and work my way back.
For sure.
All right. Well, cool. Anything you want to share with anybody? What's going on with Circle D? Any products you want to point out or sales? Anything? I don't know. Whatever.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. So, We do things a little bit differently just in our nomenclature. So we refer to everything by the metric system rather than, Nissan 9.5 inch or, 10 inch or 10.5, whatever. So if you hear us talk about, our Pro Series 252 millimeter, 258 millimeter, 264 millimeter, we're still working with the same common cores that other builders are. We just like to keep consistency in nomenclature and kind of have our own thing, so to speak, that way. It's not like trade secrecy or anything like that. It's just the Circle D brand. So if you're not used to that, it's not that we have, some sort of secret hidden high-tech wizardry behind the cores that we're using. It's just our own in-house nomenclature, and really what makes the magic happen is, in our Stator designs, where we set up the converter clearances, our CFD modeling, and all that goes. A lot of people don't know that Circle D does have a really killer bolt-together converter program already in place, but they have had that. That's not something that's new. They have had that for a while, and I've kind of come on board to help them, with marketing and promoting, and also from the developmental side, and helping in the Stator side of research and development and design and all that kind of stuff, and help take the Bolt Together drag racing program to the next level. And that program is currently focused on our 252 Pro Series. But as we speak, we're designing the parts for a 258 millimeter as well as a 264 millimeter. We should have those parts done shortly in terms of our own billet aluminum drive covers for the Bolt Together stuff. So very quickly, we're going to have drag racing converter options, everything from even just a basic welded converter for like an 800 or 900 horsepower bracket guy. We do those. And then the Bolt Together stuff, anything from, 800 horsepower to, 4,000 or 5,000 horsepower for like a Pro 275 car, Radio versus the World. Like we actually have not only do we have the capability, but those parts are being made as we speak. So some pretty exciting things as far as us getting out there and really tackling the drag racing market aggressively, and trying to level up some people's programs, and just continue to learn and grow. We want to be the best that we possibly can at what we do. We got a lot to learn, and it's just really fun, really exciting. And then we're getting into billet flex plates as well. Right now we have them for LS 6-bolt and 8-bolt applications. So yeah, a lot of fun and exciting projects going on right now.
Lightest steel flex plate I found as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting piece because, Chris and Ronnie worked really hard on the engineering side of that thing to do that intelligently, just not punch holes in it. So they actually ran that flex plate through some modeling software and finite element analysis to strategically place those holes in areas where it wouldn't compromise strength. So that flex plate's actually specifically engineered to be the lightest weight billet steel option on the market at the highest strength. So
we'll find out shortly.
Yeah, exactly.
9,000 RPM, 2,000 horsepower.
Yeah,
it's coming shortly.
Yes, sir. It sure is. But yeah, that's a piece we're pretty proud of. There's a lot of thought that went into that. So
awesome. We appreciate you guys taking the engineering and taking the time to actually really go the extra mile and do the research and do what you guys do for everybody. And I just want to say thank you to you guys for doing that. Appreciate your knowledge that you bring and everything that coming together. I think it's a great seeing you all together,
Yeah, it's like a dream come true for me. So I couldn't be happier.
Awesome. Well, thank you much, everybody. We appreciate you guys watching, and we thank you, John, for coming on, Mark and Jasper as well, too.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
no problem. You guys are always welcome to come on. And we're going to kind of wrap things up here in just a minute, and we will see you guys on Thursday. We'll talk to you some more, talks about the Chicago Street Outlaws and some of the filming. May have that. We may have a couple of the winners from this weekend. Turnbull John won this weekend and a few others. So we'll definitely have that on our regular show. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys, and have a great night.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
you
guys.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Pete.
Hang on for a second.